Yeah, hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
Okay, so can you please tell me about your recent projects?
Yeah, sure. So, recently I worked on developing a microservices based application for a retail banking system, right? So, in this project, I mainly use Java and Spring Boot, and the application's objective
Mm-hmm.
was to streamline various banking operations like account management, transactions, and customer services, right? So, our team decided to use microservices architecture to ensure scalability and independent service manageability, right? And
Mm-hmm.
basically, I was responsible for designing and developing several microservices, including the transaction processing service and account management service. So, yeah, that's all about my recent project where I worked on.
Okay, so why was a microservice architectures preferred over a monolithic architectures for your retail banking system project?
Okay, so basically, in this project, we picked microservices because
Mm-hmm.
it lets us split the big system into smaller parts, right? And this way, actually, it was easier to work on, update, and make each part better on its own, right? And if one
Mm-hmm.
part has a problem, right, it doesn't stop everything else from working. So, and also it also helps us new tech stuff more smoothly, right? As we can change one small
Okay.
part without messing with the rest one. So, I believe that's why microservice architecture
Mm-hmm.
preferred over monolithic architecture for not only our project, but it's general thing.
Okay, so can you please tell me about string and string buffer?
Okay, so basically, string is like a line of text that doesn't change, right? Once we create a string, we cannot change it letters or add more to it, right? If we try to change it, Java makes a new line of text with the changes and leaving the original untouched. So that's what about string. Now talking about string buffer. So it is like a flexible line of text, right? We can add to it, change it, or take parts away without making a new one every time. So it's a great
Mm-hmm.
when we need to keep changing the text, like adding more words or letters, because it's faster and use less memory than making a new string every time we want to change something. So yeah, that's all about string buffer.
Okay, so I just wanted to know that why
Mhm.
is a string buffer called mutable?
Okay, so basically, string buffer is called mutable because we can
Mm-hmm.
change its text without making a whole new text object, as I told you, right? If we add,
Mm-hmm.
remove, or change characters, it happens in the same object, right? This is different from regular text or regular string, which I have already talked about, right? Where changing it always creates a new object. So, a string buffer is a great for when we need to change the text a lot because it's faster and doesn't fill up memory with new objects every time we make a change. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
string buffer is called mutable.
Okay, so
Hmm.
there are different ways to create an object in Java. Okay,
Okay.
so
Hmm.
can you just please give some ways about to create
Okay.
objects in Java?
Okay. 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 So yeah, in Java there are different ways to create objects. Okay. So the
Mm-hmm.
most common method is using the new keyword, right? And another way is through reflection, where we call class dot for name. This is useful when we don't know the class of the object until runtime, right? And we can also use the clone method to make a copy of an existing object, or we can deserialize an object from a source like a file or database, turning data into an object by using the same clone method. And lastly, there are some design patterns like the factory patterns that provides methods to create objects without directly using the new keyword. So these are some of the ways through which we can create objects in Java.
Okay, so can you use a private constructor? And if your response is yes, so where
Mhm.
we can use it?
Okay. So basically, yes, we can use private constructors in
Mm-hmm.
Java, and They are mostly used in classes that provide static method or contain only static field, right?
Mhm.
A common use is in the singleton design pattern, where the goal is to limit the class to only one object, right? By making the constructor private, basically we prevent anyone else from creating new instance of the class from the outside. Okay, so this way we can control the creation of objects strictly within the class itself, right? And ensuring that only one instance is created and accessible globally. So yeah, that's why
Mhm.
I mean, that's where we use private constructor.
Okay, so can you just give some methods that threads use to communicate with each other?
Okay, so yeah, so basically threads in
Mhm.
Java talk to each other using three main ways: a wait method, notify method, and notify all method. Okay, there are some other methods as well, but uh, these three are the major methods, right? When a thread use wait method on an object, it stops and wait, right? And this second one, notify methods, wakes up one thread that is waiting, and notify all method wakes up all the threads waiting on that object. Okay, so these actions have
Mhm.
to happen in a special area of code called synchronized blocks, right? Which makes
Okay.
sure a thread can safely pause or wake up without messing things up, right? So yeah, this is how threads wait their turn or let others know they can go ahead or not. So yeah, this is how they communicate with each other.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
what is the starter dependency in Spring Boot application?
Okay, so basically, a starter dependency in Spring Boot is like a package that bundles together all the things we need for a specific part of our project, right? We can say
Mhm.
like web development or working with databases, right? Instead of adding each library one by one, we just add one starter and it brings everything else for us, right? And I think this makes setting up a project quicker and helps avoid mistakes where some part don't work well together. So this is all about starter dependency in Spring Boot application.
Okay. So, how do you connect a database to a Spring Boot application?
Okay, so yeah, I have connected database to Spring Boot application multiple times, and I think this is one of the most important thing in our project. So to connect a database to a Spring Boot application, uh, we typically add a starter dependency for the database in a POM XML or Gradle file. Okay, this automatically includes the necessary libraries, right? Then we configure the database connections in the application properties or YAML file by setting up the database URL, username, password, and other parameters like the driver class name, etc., etc., right? And Spring Boot uses this information to establish the connection. For example, for
Mhm.
connecting to MySQL database, we would add the Spring Boot starter for data JPA and MySQL driver dependency, and then specify our database details in the configuration file. So that's how we connect the database to Spring Boot application.
Okay. So, can you explain some changes in internal working of Hashmap in Java 8?
Okay, so yeah, I can tell you. So basically, in Java 8, the internal working of Hashmap was improved for better performance, right? Before Java 8, Hashmap used linked lists to store entries in
Mhm.
each bucket, right? Which could lead to slow search times. We can say ON in the worst case, right? When many entries ended up in the same bucket. Okay. Now from onwards, Java 8, when the number of items in the bucket reaches to a certain threshold limit, right? Let's say 8, right? Then the linked list is transformed into a balanced tree. uh, that's balanced tree is nothing but a red black tree, right? And that reduce the
Mhm.
search time to from on to login, right? This
Mhm.
significantly speeds up search operations in scenarios with high hash collisions. So this was the major changes. So this optimization was the major change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as we're talking about the changes were done in Java 8, so can
Mm-hmm.
you just give about the changes were done in Java 8 for garbage collection? That
Mm,
what changes were done in Java 8 for
mm,
garbage collections? The question is that.
okay. Got it.
Mhm.
So, changes for garbage collection in Java 8. So, basically, a significant change to garbage collection was in introduction of the garbage. First,
Mhm.
something like that, G1 collector as a replacement for the concurrent mask sweep, something like that, CMS collector. So I'm
Mhm.
not sure on this, but there was something like G1 collector was introduced with the replacement of CMS. Not sure about what CMS is doing and what G1 is
Mhm.
used to do. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So, why was default method introduced in Java 8?
okay, default method. Hmm. So default methods were introduced in Java 8 to enable interfaces to have methods with implementation without breaking existing implementations, right? These features
Mhm.
allow developers to add new methods to interfaces where ensuring backward compatibility with classes that already implement these interfaces and it was particularly useful for enhancing the collections API with Lambda expression and enabling operation like for each without forcing all implementing classes to change. And default method helps evolve interfaces more flexibility and maintainability. Basically, by providing a default behavior that implementing classes can override if they choose to. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So,
let
can you just tell me that why optional was introduced in Java 8?
Okay, optional classes. Okay, 1 second. So, optional was introduced in Java 8 as a way to address the problem of null references, right? Which are a common source of errors, right? We can say null pointer exception, right? It provides a certain object which may or may not contain a non-null value. Okay. So, by
Mm-hmm.
choosing optional, developers can explicitly deal with the presence or absence of a value and making the code more readable and eliminating the need to write boilerplate null checks. Okay. So, this approach
Mm-hmm.
encourages a more functional programming style, making it easier to handle values that might be missing, right? Thereby reducing the chances of runtime errors related to null
Mm-hmm.
handling. So that's why I believe that's why optional was introduced in Java.
Okay. So, can you just tell me that what is the latest version of Spring Boot and how the latest one is different from Spring Boot 2?
Okay, so the latest Spring Boot version is 3.2.2, right? And it makes setting up Spring applications even easier and works better with modern technology like cloud services and microservices, etc. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we compared this latest version with Spring Boot 2, it has better support for the latest Java versions and making code simpler and is efficient for big projects and big microservices, monolithic and cloud services based projects. So yeah.
Okay. So, how many types of scopes are there in Spring?
Okay, scopes. Actually, Spring Framework supports, I think, 5 types of bean scopes. So, first one is singleton. It means one instance per Spring IOC container, right? The second one is prototype. It means new
Mm-hmm.
instance each time is new instance each time a bean is requested. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
third one is request. It means one instance per HTTP request. And fourth one is session. That means one instance per HTTP session. Okay, and the last one is
Okay.
application. It means one instance per servlet context. So these scopes allow for precise control over the life cycle and visibility of beans within applications, right? And catering to different use cases like web requests, session management, and general application configurations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, have you ever used any design pattern in your project?
Design pattern. Yeah, I have used
Mm-hmm.
design patterns multiple times in my project. So once we use design patterns like Singleton, Factory, and Observer. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, Singleton helped us make sure we only had one instance of something like a connection pool, right? And Factory pattern let us create objects without saying exactly which class to use, right? Making our code more flexible. Okay, and
Okay.
Observer made it easy for parts of a program to talk with each other without being directly connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these patterns kept our code neat and made it easier to handle changes. So till now, I use these three patterns only, and yeah, and definitely in future, if I need, so I'll definitely use some different patterns as well.
Okay. So, as you said that you use the singleton pattern.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
why you have used that pattern?
Okay, so as I told you, we use singleton patterns because
Mm-hmm.
it ensures that a class has only one instance and provides a global point of access to it, right? This was particularly useful for managing resources like, for my case, it was particularly useful for managing resources like database connections or configuration settings where it makes sense to have just one instance in the application, right? And by using Singleton, we made sure that these resources were controlled and accessed in a consistent manner, reducing the chance of
Mm-hmm.
error and making the overall system more efficient and easier to debug. So that's why we have used Singleton pattern in our project.
Okay. So, does singleton pattern affect the unit tests?
Okay, so yes, using Singleton can make unit tests hard because it shares one instance across
Mm-hmm.
all tests, right? So these can cause
Okay.
one test to affect other by changing this shared instance and obviously making it tricky to keep tests independent, right? And
Okay.
it is also tough to test parts of the code that use singleton without complicated setups or changes. So yeah, that's uh,
Okay.
that's how it affects the unit test
Okay.
cases.
Okay. So, what design principles might singleton violate?
Okay, what design principle? Sorry, I'm not sure on this.
Okay. Okay. No problem. So, can you explain the solid principle?
Okay, so the solid principle basically they are the key concepts in object-oriented programming that helps in creating maintainable and scalable software, right? And these are most important principles for even enterprise application. And if someone is getting into the projects and or want to make projects a professional one, okay. So they include multiple things, right? I mean, each alphabet represents a different thing. Like, for example, like S stand for single responsibility, which means a class should have only one reason to change, right? And O stands for open close, which means classes should be opened for extension but closed for modification, right? And L
Okay.
stands for list of substitution, which means objects of a superclass should be replaceable with objects of subclass without affecting the correctness of the program, right? And uh, uh, I stands for interface segregation, which means
Mm-hmm.
no client should be forced to depend on methods it does not use, right? And lastly, D stands for dependency inversion, which means depend on abstraction, not on correction, right? So by following these principles, They helps in reducing coupling, increasing flexibility, and making code easier to understand and modify. So that's all about solid principles.